And we are live. Welcome to The Awakening Educator. I'm Susan Andrian, and with my co-host,
Megan Sweet with headphones on today.
I was going to say, you sound different. You sound so professional, Megan.
Do I? I love
it. And you made me realize I don't even have my microphone on.
Well, you plug in, Susan. I would love to introduce our guest, Lois Letchford, who has quite an interesting story to tell. But before we get into that, Lois, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I am the author of the book, Reversed, a Memoir. I consider myself a literacy problem solver, and I am a literacy expert because of my story. So I wrote my story, which is a long-term case study, which began in 1994 when my son, Nicholas, failed first grade. And the prognosis was dire. And as you know, when a child is 6 and they receive a dire prognosis, the chances of overcoming that are very, very small.
Right. So that's the story we're going to talk about. Okay.
That's the story we're going to talk about. And so 1994, we're now 2021. So you've got numerous years in between to see what happened and see what happened now.
I'm excited to hear about it. 1994 is a big year for me, Lois, because that's the year that I graduated from college and started teaching. So that's the year I mark my adult life starting, and I'm about ready to enter my, what is that then? 1994. It's been a really long time.
26.
My 26th year in education. So
26 years ago.
Yeah, that is
maybe 27.
4
and 7 is 11, isn't it? 27. I've got it
27.
Wrong.
Yeah, I was going to say 26 felt short. So a long time. So
yes.
Maybe it'd be great just to start right from the beginning then. So your son got this diagnosis. Maybe you can describe a little bit about what was going on there. You don't have to get into too much detail, but kind of what this dire diagnosis was and then what you did with that.
Well, he went to school as you send children to school at the age of 5.5, and he was afraid. He was terrified of going. And I spoke to the teacher on day 6 of school, and she just threw up her hands and said, well, he's so far behind. I don't know what I'm going to do with him. That was day 6. How I wish I'd removed him from school there and then. I didn't. I sent him to school every day. He wet his pants. He bit his fingernails. He sat isolated in the lunchroom and ate by himself every single day of the year. At the end of the year, you get testing, and the testing reveals that he can read 10 words. A student normally has 1,000 words. He can read 10, including honour no reversals. He's got no strengths. And above all, Mrs. Letchford, your son has a low IQ.
Wow. So as a parent, what was your first thought when that hit, that information hit?
I don't know that it really sunk in. It's overwhelming. Thankfully, my husband is a professor. And when I told him what I'd been told, he just said, Nicholas can look like that on any day. It's a lower bound. That's what his response was. And that was a huge comfort for me. But most people wouldn't think that. And the school didn't think that. The school has their results in black and white. They are right. You are wrong. And that's where the problem comes.
Right. I think that's a really good point. And I've thought about this a lot in my life too, Lois, which I don't think we've talked about on this show, but in my kindergarten year, first grade year, I was fine, no problems. And then I got to second grade, and suddenly I was in the low reading group, and I was, considered, I don't know, whatever the struggling
special
birds. Yeah, in one of those groups, right? So I was in the special reading recovery group and everything else. I didn't know. I had no idea what was different until I got to second grade, and then suddenly I knew there was something wrong. In the next year, And my mom knew everybody at the school. So I think parent agencies are a big deal. And it's something I think a lot about as an educator, because if you have agency as a parent, then you can take that information and use it or ignore it or have some choice to what to do with your child. And so many parents don't have that perspective. So for me, what happened was my mom knew all the teachers. They weren't worried about it. My parents, I will say, it didn't register much for them. But the next year, I was in a classroom with a teacher who had my older sister who knew my mother, and so the teacher, was had a vested interest in me and my experience. And so when I told her um, that, so when I came in as a lower reading group, she kind of knew me and my family, and that didn't quite jive with her. And I went out, reached out to her, and I was like, I don't want to be in the lower reading group. I want to be in the top reading group. That's what I just told her as an 8-year-old. This surprises no one who knows me. And and she was like, cool, here's what you need to do. And she gave me the work to do. And I did it on my own, at home. I don't even think my parents even knew it was happening, to be quite honest with you. And within a few months, I went from being the lowest reading group to being in a gifted and talented program. So, part of it was my own chutzpah, right? Like my own desire.
Yes.
But I think a lot of it was those relationships my parents had, the level of chutzpah in the first place, right? So I had to be fairly entitled or grounded in who I was and have access to opportunity to be able to name that. And I was able to pull myself out of that, and suddenly I was in a gifted talented program. My academic career continued to wax and wane until I got to college. But I think about, as a teacher, it was something that worried me so much, was kids whose parents didn't have that kind of comfort or ease, or didn't have the relationships with the teachers, or they didn't have a strong academic experience themselves. And suddenly they get the kind of announcement that you heard about your son. And I feel like the outcome can be profoundly different. So I would love to hear what you did. So your husband didn't worry about it. He figured your son was gonna be able to rebound. What did you do to start to respond to that?
We are privileged.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Not just privileged. As I said, my husband's a professor. Mm-hmm. And the following year, 1995, we had 6 months away. He has study leave in Oxford, England, capital of the academic world.
Right.
I take a series of books with me called Success for All, and it's got words on a page. He's meant to, say the letter, give the sound, and create a word. He couldn't do it. He went through a page. At the end of the page, gets back to the first word. No idea. No idea at all. So to me, at that point, he looks really dumb. I'm getting frustrated. My mother-in-law was with me, and she said, Lois, put away what's not working and make learning fun. That was my one. Well, he can't do what you expect him to be able to do. So it's not working. So you've now got an open door. Do whatever you like. So I'm panicked. What can he do? What am I going to do? Because I felt at that time I really was responsible for his future. Mm-hmm. Okay. I knew he could rhyme words, and I knew he was quite good at pattern recognition. So I thought, what can I do? Write simple poems with rhyming words. So I did. The day I brought that poem into the classroom with him changed everything. He relaxed because I'm not expecting him to read anything. I'm reading to him. We're reading it again and again and again. We find the rhyming words. We find the vocabulary words. We create a picture. Because it happened once, I did it again and again and again. And it was transformative. Mm-hmm. It was transformative. And then one person spoke to me in Oxford, and she gave me a series of books called Hear It, See It, Say It, Do It, about decoding. But I did the poetry first, and the decoding was second. And the books that she gave me dealt with consonant digraphs first, short vowel only. Nicholas took 8 weeks to do consonant digraphs, TH, SH and CH, short vowel, before he could read everyone independently. And from that, we went to consonant blends, the PL, the SL, the PRs, another 8 weeks. There's our time. on those 4 things. Okay.
So I mean, first of all, Megan and I have talked about our story before. I had a similar story. I was a very struggling student, was made to believe I'm stupid at a very early age, was not a good student. Remember very clearly that coming home with the 7 ends and just the traumatic experience of being in school and the impact that has. And then that you were able to interrupt that as a parent, that you, as you said, you had the privilege of being able to be surrounded by folks that were really able to help you recognize what was happening and then bring joy in, which is for me right now, a lot of the work that I'm working at schools is like, how do we remember to make sure that joy and laughter and play, we want to make those associations, right? We want education to be joyful. Hard
for everyone,
for everybody,
for adults too.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, and the other thing that you did is I totally agree with what you said, Susan. And also what I heard is that you had an assets-based approach, which I often encourage educators to focus upon, and for us to focus upon ourselves as well. I think our brains are wired to look for what's wrong and to fix it. And we bring that forward to ourselves and how we approach our lives. When we do that, then actually what we're doing is we're focusing our attention on what's not working and continuing to reinforce that belief and that pattern. But if we focus on what is possible, and I talk about this a lot with folks that are working with kids that are behind, is what can they do? What can you build on that kids can do? If you have a group of kids and they're supposed to know their alphabet, they don't know their alphabet now, what do they know?
What
Do they
can
know
you do?
one letter? Great.
Yeah.
Let's start there. Let's focus on
Yeah.
what they can do and build that,
Yeah.
what is going to bring
Yeah.
learning to life for them.
Yeah.
And that's just, yeah, I've got like goosebumps when I think about that, because these are make or break moments that so many kids aren't having the benefit of experiencing.
The other thing that was really resonated for me that came up is your son was wetting his pants. He was having all these symptoms that often people go right to like diagnosing or ED, that we're seeing these extreme symptoms of distress and not accurately being able to say, to take the time to slow down to see what are these signs of distress coming from, and how do we really make sure that we get kids back into a place of feeling in their body regulated and comforted to be able to learn, because they're not going to learn if they're in that level of distress.
Right. Exactly. And when I first went to Oxford with the Success for All book, repeated what the first grade teacher did.
Right. Right.
I repeated it. And my poor little boy, you could see it. The shoulders are by the ears. It's not that he just couldn't do it. He couldn't do it in that way. Anyway, the story continues because I'm writing poems. I'm actually and I don't write. So it takes me all the time. I have a pen and paper by me all the time. Write. Double O comes up to learn. And what are the words with double O in them? Cook, look, and book. I wrote about the last of the great explorers, Captain James Cook, who wrote a book who took a look without the help of any book, hoping to find a quiet little nook. While we're doing that and studying it, we happen to be at a museum where we see these globes from across the centuries. And I looked at a globe, and I said, look, Nicholas, there's no Australia. There's a gap in the map. Over time, Nicholas said to me, who came before Captain Cook? I said, that's easy, Nicholas. That's Christopher Columbus. And he said to me, and who came before Columbus? That was the question that said this child does not have a low IQ. And I needed to see that. Now, the other component of this is we are in Oxford, England, in a place that is brand new to my children. And what do you know about Oxford? Every time you turn around, there's something else to look at. So we're in Oxford, and Nicholas says again, can we see a Ptolemy map? Because this all connects. Christopher Columbus' latest map was drawn by Ptolemy in 250 AD. Can we see a Ptolemy map? Nicholas, I haven't got a clue where we'd find a Ptolemy map. Let's go to the Bodleian Library and ask. We walk into the Bodleian Library gift shop. It's the second biggest library in the UK. And say, where would we find a Ptolemy map? The lady turns around, reaches down behind the counter, pulls out a book and says, "This is a book of Ptolemy maps. That'll be £5, please." So there's an experience that's going on that's connecting the reading and the writing, the joy of learning, not only for Nicholas, but for me, because if I read anything to Nicholas from a book, because you can't get this level of book for 7-year-olds, I lost him. He didn't have the language to understand, and he would turn his head away and just not listen. I had to read everything, turn it into a poem, then talk to him. Once it was in poem format, we could discuss it. The curiosity that he had, the experience, just the love of learning came from then.
I'm curious about story too, because my son really struggled to learn how to read, and he had different issues, but then became a reader by just an endless reader. But partly it was because of the love of story, right? So while we were teaching him phonics and coding, we also had Audible, where he would listen to Percy Jackson and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and books that were matching his creativity and intellectual skill, but were far beyond his phonics and coding skills. And eventually they caught up, and then he became a reader. And I'm wondering, is that and my husband and I at the time, he was like, as long as he keeps listening to stuff, he's never going to be motivated to read. And we would have these debates, and I won this one.
I like the word debate. That's good.
But I won this one. He was like, okay, I'll defer on this one. And he listened to and he would listen to Percy Jackson over and over again. So he was also getting the flow of language and reading, how do we read? How do we put inflection and all of that stuff?
Knowledge of story structure comes with listening, that you get the flow, that you build up the characters, you build up the language of your peers. Critical component of success long term.
Now, Lois, you were an educator before, is that right?
I trained as a physical education teacher.
Okay. So, because I wonder about, your ability to take learning and translate it for your son, to me, obviously I kind of knew you were a teacher, but I forgot what kind. But suggests that you had an interest in that anyway, an ability to think in that kind of creative process, and through trial and error and leaning into joy, found a way that works for your son, which is amazing and super exciting. And I love, something we've talked about a lot on the show. I was trying to repeat back for others what you did. Not only did you look for the assets, you connected the learning to
experience
and to what he wanted to know and learn about, and made a real world application to the content he was learning, which makes learning come alive for every single child. So when we get kids that are behind and we stick them in classrooms where they're repeating rote knowledge, rote content over and over again to try and make them learn, all it does in my mind is make learning no fun, and actually punish kids, because then you're stuck in the classroom. If you're behind, then you actually are missing out on some of the other more engaging parts of learning, because all of your free time is dedicated to this remediation. And I think remediation is needed. I don't want to say that remediation is never an option, or not necessary, but when we do that to the detriment of creating joy and inquiry and opportunity for kids to explore what they are good at and what does bring them joy, I think we end up unintentionally doing a disservice to our kids. And so Nicholas starts learning. I just want to pick up the journey and kind of take us from there. So Nicholas starts learning, and in this time when you're at Oxford, is he not in school? Is he in
He's
school?
Not in school.
Okay.
I homeschool. He refused to go to school, basically. He just refused. And the first 2 months we're there, they go on summer break. So we're down to 4 months.
Okay.
And I could really only work with him when I had family to look after our youngest one, because we have 3 sons, because Nicholas wouldn't work when there was any sort of interaction going on. So the time is reducing all the time. That's irrelevant. No, it's not. We return to Australia, and I meet the lady who'd done the testing 12 months prior, and I said, we've had such fun. It's been so exciting for Nicholas. And she said, well, I've spoken to the reading teacher, and he's gone backwards. And in fact, he's the worst child I've seen in 20 years of teaching.
Oh, that's such an, my heart is just broken to hear a teacher talk about a child that way.
Yeah.
What it did for me was that I stopped. Of course, I'm absolutely devastated. Within a couple of hours, I go back to her and I said, you can call him whatever you like, but if he is the worst child you've seen in 20 years of teaching, don't expect him to learn like everyone else. For me to respond to her in that way, I needed the knowledge of working with Nicholas for the past months.
Right.
I needed to know that he had a love of learning and a drive of learning and a passion for learning. Now, this is the really tough bit. Then that afternoon, he comes home from school, and the reading teacher, he's got a classroom teacher who is now phenomenal, and a reading teacher. The reading teacher now gives him 10 sight words. She gives him the same standardized sentence she gives every other child in the school. He can read 8 of the 10 words. The 2 words he doesn't know are now and the word saw. For the word saw, he pulls it out and he reads, I saw a cat climb up a tree. No, he didn't. That was the sentence. He read, I saw a cat. No, he said. I was a cat. No, he said. I had a cat and I said, and he just handed me the paper. It took me a while to work out what's going on. And I don't want to ask you on air what you think is going on. So I'll tell you.
Good.
The word saw has how many meanings?
Many.
At least 3. The teacher has only given the abstract meaning of the word saw. She gave 2 sentences. I only gave you 1. I saw a cat climb up a tree. The second sentence she gave was, I saw a man rob a bank. Right? He didn't even attempt that one. She's only given the abstract meaning of the word saw. Nicholas might be on the autism spectrum. What do we know about children on the autism spectrum? They see the world concretely. I saw a cat. I cut the cat in half. No, I didn't do that. I was a cat. No, I was never a cat. I've never been a cat. The other 2 don't make sense. Where's the gap? The gap is between the teaching and the student. She has failed to connect the child's background knowledge and his experience, and she's failed to show him how the written language works. And when I teach this today, this is what I do. I take my students onto the internet and I say, type in the word saw. What comes up? All of the saws come up. Print out, to copy and paste a picture. That's the first thing. This is a saw. This is a chainsaw, a hacksaw, or some other saw. The second meaning of the word saw, it means to cut. Saw a log, put it in, get a picture. Use a lot of pictures. That's day 1. Day 2, I take my students for a walk. And we go to the library. And I talk to the librarian, and we talk to the librarian. Then we watch the librarian. We watch her put books away or read to children, whatever it is. And then we leave, and we say to the librarian, bye-bye, we've got to go and talk about you now. We walk away, and we shut the door. And then I say to my students, what did we do? We saw the librarian reading to children. We saw the librarian putting books back on the shelf. We saw the library. What does it mean? It means we looked at her. It doesn't mean we looked at her now. We looked at her when? Now in the past. In the past. And when you start going down this track, you start to look at what is the child's oral language like. Do they have the word saw in their oral language? Or do they say, I seed it? Or we sawed it, which is all the past tense. The other component of that was that Nicholas had just spent 6 months in a foreign country, and that teacher did not personalise his instruction to say, Nicholas, tell me what you saw when you were in England.
Right.
So there's so many components of it. We are up on our first break, and there's so many directions that we can go. I mean, that I'm already like, and I know Meg, and I can see Megan over there. I can see she's wanting to go as well. And I'm excited because I think we have some really important areas to sort of dig into and think through. But this is our first break. So when we come back, what I'd really like to think about is, first, I want to say how absurd the English language is, and we really highlighted that, right? Like our language is just so absurd, and which makes it hard to read. And then, but I'd really like to think about this disconnect between educators and their students. I think you said it was the gap between. And how do we start to support our educators who are really struggling and working hard? Most are like really trying very hard, but if they keep doing the same thing, how do we support them to reflect on practice, to then show up both emotionally and instructionally to help our kids get past wherever they are? So let's go on a break and for a quick second, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody.
Our magic breaks.
Our magic
Those of you who are listening to it later don't know that what we do is we turn off the camera for like a second and then we turn it back on again.
It's perfect.
It's perfect.
It is perfect. Yeah, I mean, there's so many pieces that, so welcome back. We're with Lois Letchford, who tells a story about helping her son, who was described as the worst student a teacher had ever seen. And that's where my mind was starting to rattle off. So I'd love to talk about that too, but about how do you start to support students to who aren't traditional learners to learn, and then therefore the work that Lois has done ever since then. I'd love to do a little bit of like, where is your son now? And all of that, because he's a grown up now. But also just, I mean, I think this is I'll say this one thing and then I'd like to hear your story continue, which is educators, adults, humans, please pay attention to how you're talking to children. I know I made these same mistakes when I was a teacher, so I am not pointing fingers, without also understanding that I have made these same mistakes myself. But there's plenty of brain research to show that the way we talk to children and the way we treat children sets them up for a lifetime of expectations. They are like sponges, and their sense of self and their self-concept can be so deeply impacted by those, what I think often educators think are throwaway words or phrases, or they're frustrated and they're just saying something because they don't know what to do. But it has an impact. It has an impact on what kids think about themselves, what they think is possible for themselves, and not just in that time they're with you, but for a lifetime.
Yeah, a lifetime.
So we just have to be so careful about how we talk to kids and what we think is possible for kids. And if we really feel like we don't think something's possible for our kid, we need to get help for ourselves to find a way to support that child to be successful. Because and I know that's easier said than done when you have 32 children in a classroom and you're teaching during a pandemic and all the other things that are true for educators. So this is why I'm always like, we need to regulate ourselves and take care of ourselves so that we have the bandwidth to catch ourselves when those moments show up and kind of short circuit them. So I'm saying this with all the compassion in the world, but also please be mindful of how we talk to kids and what we think is possible for children. All right, I'm off my soapbox. I just had to say it because it just breaks my heart. So yeah, go ahead, Susan.
I was gonna say, a lot of my work is actually supporting teachers and educators with this, and it's been a particularly difficult week because I see the demand that's on teachers right now with this current school year, and that their resilience is really stretching thin, and because the kids are coming with more needs than ever. They haven't been in school. They don't have the stamina for the full day. Like for kindergarten, first grade, second grade have not really been in a classroom. So when they were tired, they lied down. When they were hungry, they went to the fridge. And so I'm seeing the this demand really increase, and that the things I have heard adults say about children and to children in the last couple of weeks has been very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's such a great point, and I want to get back to you, Lois, but now I want to talk to your points, which is, you know, I
Well,
mean, I think part of what none of us know, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, Lois, is we don't know what the impact of this pandemic is going to have on our children and on their learning. And I saw two things just recently that, or experienced one personally, and then just read one just a few hours ago. So I read just a couple of hours ago that they're finding that the IQs of children born during the pandemic or immediately before, so our 1-year-olds to like 3-year-olds, their IQ is significantly lower than in the average.
I don't believe it.
I don't believe it either. I think what will be true is once they're actually able to be in stimulating environments again, they will rebound and they will be able to come back. I don't think this is a chronic issue. My point with that, and then with my personal one with my son, as Susan knows, we just got the final test back today, he grew 6 inches during the pandemic while also being, he's a middle schooler, while also not exercising like all the rest of us and spending a lot of time indoors. And his muscles didn't form appropriately. And his doctors thought that he might have a neurological condition that scared the heck out of all of us. But it's really because he wasn't moving his body the way we would normally expect. So there's all these things that are outside of the norm for our children, no matter what age, and yet we're trying to go right back to school. And we said this, we're going right back to school the way it was before, because that's what we know how to do, and we haven't had a chance to really think or catch our breath. So again, I'm not pointing any fingers at educators, but it's a problem because we're trying to act as if the last year didn't happen, and that we don't have to readjust how we interact with kids and help kids to re-engage back with school again. Okay, I'm done again with my soapbox. Lois, what are your thoughts on all these things we just talked about? Just say something, because I'm going to keep going.
I do a YouTube series. I read things on YouTube, and I've read about people who changed the world. Historians, particularly scientists. The history from Nicholas has come over to me, because we don't get to anything today without a big history, and someone did something first. So I read about Alan Turing, the guy who invented the computer during World War II. When did he succeed most in school? Not when he was sitting in the classroom. When he got sick and he was in the sick bay, and that's when he devoured books, he devoured Einstein's work, he devoured ... That's when his growth jumped. Right. The idea that IQ and learning is linear and goes on a line is irrelevant, and it's not true. So kids learn. The more, I love what you say, Susan, the more we can engage children in their learning, the more they love learning, the more they're reading, and it's not linear, and it's not just answering the questions on a test. Find out about pandemics around the world. Find out about the Black Plague. Start to research. Learning happens in multiple ways. I read the book Curious by Mario Labio, and in that he said curiosity propagates in the brain in unknown ways, because we take slices of the brain and say we can take a look at the brain activity. He said doing that is like taking a slice of the ocean. And that's exactly what happened to Nicholas and many of my other students. Once they get one concept and that taste of learning, what else do I have to know?
Yeah.
This is, and like yours, the reading of the books, the listening to the books, what it does to the brain cannot be quantified in a standardized test of multi-choice questions.
That's right. And now he's a writer and a director in film, so he sort of ended up in the storytelling, along with his dad also is too. So it was funny at the time, but he believed in it. It was just he was worried because our son was resistant to the learning part. There's another piece that you mentioned there that I want to acknowledge. I want to get a little bit to that 0 to 3 month IQ thing, because I'm actually curious I have a theory that we're going to see more well attached and relationally connected, because being home, not forcing babies to go into childcare at 6 weeks or 8 weeks, but these kids actually having the relational first 3 years. And that what we know is IQ is functionally based. So that what were these circumstances, right? So that it's all state dependent. So if we're putting kids they've been home for 3 years with their 2 years, 3 years with their parents, they've been in these safe relational things. We put them in a new environment and test their IQ. Their stress response system is activated. So I dismiss that that's an accurate assessment of what they're actually capable right now. What if we went into the home and just observed and gave them tasks while they were in a safe and relational space? Would we see something different?
Susan, you're so smart, first of all. You have such a good brain, and I always smile when you start talking about brain stuff, because I'm lost instantly. I'm like start going off la 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 because I can't follow, because you're so smart. I think you're right. And it a little bit gets to my point, and why I'm so excited to talk with you, Lois, about like, and you and I have talked about this a lot, Susan, like we need to reimagine education and how we're teaching kids, and we need to create different opportunities. And that requires an investment. This isn't on the educators to suddenly come up with 20, 30 different ways of educating our children. That's not the point. What we need to do is find ways to have schooling be more adaptable and dynamic, and allow kids to be able to kind of grow and learn the way they need to. I imagine we're going to have a world where we're coming in and out of shelter in place. Possibly this is going to be our new normal. The world's getting smaller. The environment, global warming's a thing. And I just feel like this is the moment to start to imagine something different. And your child, it's kind of life-saving, Lois, that you guys got to go away to Oxford at that critical moment.
Not kind of. It was critical, because I think if we had left him in the school system, particularly with the reading teacher, my classroom teachers were absolutely phenomenal, but the reading teacher left a lot to be desired, sadly. Right. And I thought even if we'd had a study leave anywhere else in the world, we would not have had the experiences we had in Oxford. I don't know where you want to take this conversation, but I could tell you, I could take it right through to the end without dealing with the middle, because it comes back to you, Susan. Do you want to go there?
Do it.
Do it. Let's do it.
Right. In 2013, 2007, Nicholas graduates in the top 20% of his class, doing physics, chemistry, mathematics, la, 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 you name it. He got the Yes I Can award for exceptional children that year for academics. In 2013, he graduates with 2 honours degrees after 5.5 years of doing mathematics and engineering. And in January 2013, he's on a plane to London because he's got a scholarship to do a PhD in the Department of Applied Mathematics at Oxford University. 2018, he graduates with his PhD. I talked to Nicholas then, and I say, thinking now I can ask him, Nicholas, tell me what happened in first grade, because I really didn't know. My son, my articulate, now confident son, cried. Not a word emerged. And his tongue went round and round, and he just cried, nothing. I thought, I can't go there. Nicholas, let's forget that. Let's tell me about what happened in Oxford. And the cry, the tears went to, I remember the poems you wrote for me. You wrote about Jack's Windmill on the Hill, and you wrote about the Mug of the Bar. He named the poems we wrote about. And then he said, and the mapping. I'll never forget the mapping. The mapping taught me to love learning, and I never want to stop learning. Then he started to giggle. And he said, you wrote a poem. You wrote a poem about a witch's spell, and I wrote the ingredients, and it was so funny. What was interesting about that to me, you won't find any poem about a witch's spell in my book, because I, as the author, deem my poem to be inappropriate, bad, and poor. Yet for Nicholas, it was the crowning glory of all we did in the learning. We don't know what the implications of our teaching are in the long term. But when you've got kids laughing, when they're actively engaged in the reading and writing and learning process, we change the outcomes.
But he also believed that you believed in him. He knew that you saw him and that you believed in him as a learner, right? So that he didn't, his ability to open up his heart and brain to learning, to be a learner was there because he felt safe with you. And in the classroom environment, he knew his teacher thought he was stupid. And he wasn't connected relationally, so he was closed. His brain wouldn't have been able to learn in that environment because he was in a protective stance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So my solution, you're talking about how we see these children, the language we use, the words you should have in your back of your brain is when this child struggles, say to that child, "You're a future rocket scientist," and start to believe your words.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think it's so funny that you say that your son's has a PhD in applied mathematics. One of my sisters does as well. And she is brilliant, but you know what? In school, they also thought she, like the sweet girls were really knocking it out of the park in school. So they also thought she couldn't read in third grade, and they thought she was like really low IQ. And you know what it was? It was a classroom aide who was like, no, she knows exactly the only person who took time to get to know her was a classroom aide who was like, she knows how to read, just tell her to do it. And no one had asked her the right way for whatever reason. I don't remember exactly what the story was, but it was like, I think they asked her like, can you read? And she was like, yeah. And on with her day. She didn't actually read because you didn't ask her to read.
Yes.
But when the aide sat her down and was like, read this paragraph here, she read it fluently. But because she wasn't asked in a way that made sense for her and her mind and the way her mind works, which is like very factual and concrete and linear.
Mm-hmm.
She did, inference, she's an adult now, she can handle inference, but like inference wasn't a thing for her when she was younger and she was disengaged. So unless you were very explicit with how you talk with her, you weren't going to get that out of her. And it just took somebody who knew her and was watching her and who believed in her to say that. Otherwise, again, her fate could have been really different as well. So I think it all goes back to, and I know we have a break. So maybe we come back from break, our magical breaks. We could talk a little bit about that. I mean, I feel like one of the things we've been talking a lot about is, again, knowing our children, being flexible, bringing joy and safety into the environment. So it'd be great to end on that note and also how people can connect with you, Lois. So when we come back, we'll do all of that. So we'll be back just a moment.
And I'm going to try and tag some folks because I think we're not on a stream. So I'm going to tag some folks so that we can bring some folks in. I have to forget my social media skills every other week. And we got somebody on joining with us. But welcome back.
Welcome back, everyone.
Educator. You want to bring us back in, Megan?
Oh. Sorry, I put Facebook on and I heard us repeating back to ourselves. That was weird. Sorry about that, everybody. Welcome back. So when we went on break, we were just talking about, again, learning to see the assets of our kids, looking at learning and development a little bit differently, seeking joy, and making learning come alive for children, which often doesn't align with the standard instructional program that we have available. That's nothing against educators. It's what we're working with. But how do we work around that then? So, Lois, what are your thoughts? So your kid's a huge success, and you found a way to support him. And I know you took that learning and you turned it into the work that you have been doing for the last many years. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. We're Australian, as you can hear. So Nicholas had a time in Australia, the time in England. And in 1999, my husband took a job in Lubbock, Texas. And in fact, that's when we were in Lubbock, Nicholas went from the bottom to the top. And there are 9 factors. There's a lot of things that happened in Lubbock that would not have happened in Brisbane. And what you were just saying, it goes back to that mindset. How do we see the child? So that. And while we're in Lubbock, one of the first people I meet is a mother whose 13-year-old son is non-reading, and he'd spent 4 years in a phonics-only reading program. And I said, I think I know what to do. There's more involved than just decoding. And that's all he'd had. And I said, I'll work with him. So I worked with him, and then the school district paid me to work with him over the summer. At the end of the summer, he was reading, and the mother wrote to the school district and said, you employ this woman or I sue you. I got employed. And with that, I'm now in touch with all of the children, or the parents of the children, who are squeaky wheels, who are complaining, my child's not reading. And they came to me, and my task was simply teach them to read. And because of that, I'm now teaching the children who have struggled the most and have been in and out of classrooms, been in and out of interventions, and still failed. My task was teach them to read. So that's how it happened, came about from that. And now I've got a reading writing program that we're selling, that I've connected with other people to share it. And it brings the joy of learning into reading and writing.
And it's specifically an intervention program, or is it?
Yes.
It's specifically.
It is specific, but it can be used for any child who is behind, even for kids who are on grade level, if you want to bump them up, because you just change a few things. We can transform this. Yes. But, I think I really struggle when I'm on Facebook pages that say, you've got to have structured literacy, or you've got to have this, or you've got to have that. We're forgetting the child. Is the child actively engaged in the reading process? Yes or no? If they're not actively engaged, it doesn't matter what you're teaching. Are they just parroting it back, or are they getting it? And we have to question, is the child learning what I'm teaching? If they're doing it, fine. Take a breath. Yes, they can do it. It's when they can't. What are we going to do? How are we going to change? Don't stick with the program because that's what's written in front of you.
Right.
There's a couple of things. One, Megan's always talking about the professionalizing of teachers, right? And this is what I'm thinking about, is that we have to train our teachers to be able to navigate, just as you're talking, like, okay, this is my theory of action. This is what I'm doing when it doesn't work. What am I doing to reflect on my practice to grow, and trusting teachers and creating environments where they can reflect on practice, right? Megan, am I capturing that correctly?
Yeah.
Yes.
I will tell you something else. Sorry, I've interrupted.
Go for it. Okay. We like that.
In Lubbock, Texas, my job was to go from school to school to school to school to teach children to read. I had 15 minutes between one school and another. I'm in a car. Traffic is light. What am I doing? I am reflecting constantly.
Right.
What worked? What didn't work? What do I have to do? When we are in a classroom with teachers, what do we do? There's your class, there's your class, there's your class, there's your class. Where's the time for reflection?
Yeah, there's none. It's totally, I 100% agree with you, Lois. I read about that a lot, that our inability to have the time, or sometimes I think the willingness, because it's scary sometimes when we do that reflecting. But the lack of reflection that I think educators have has a profound impact on their ability to transform as educators. And again, I'm not criticizing educators, but you're right. We don't set them up for success. We pile on, we overload them, we run them all day. With maybe a break, but that break is generally used either to eat, to go to the bathroom, or to run, print something off on the printer, it's
or to
prepare for
meet
the
with
next class.
kids, or to meet with
With kids, but
meet
it's
with
not the
parents.
time to really have a reflective time to consider what you're doing, unless you do that after you've then, put in a 12-hour day and dealt with just the energy. And it's an exhausting job being an educator, when holding the space for children. Even if you're very good at it, it takes a lot of energy to hold that. So you're right, Lois.
Particularly when you've got a whole range of students to deal with. I mean, I'm dealing with 2 or 3, at one end. And we fail to realize that takes time.
Absolutely.
Reflection takes time. And I taught, in Lubbock, and then when we returned to Australia, I'm back in the class, not in a classroom, but in a school. And that's where I really noticed there's no time for reflection. So you do with what you know.
Right.
You go with what you've got.
Yep. And I think that's why we've gone back. That's why we're reverting back to exactly what we were doing pre-pandemic, because the demands, even more so, the demands right now are because with all the protocols and COVID and testing and kids really not knowing how to do stuff, when we're stressed, we revert even more so to what we know.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. It's really, I start to get really worried about what we're going to do unless we really start to change things pretty significantly. We're almost already at time. So Lois, how can people connect with you and find you and things like that? And then I have an announcement after Lois says that too. But how do people find you?
I have my website at loisletchford.com.
Can you spell that out for us? For
Lois, Lois, Letchford, Let, as in let, CH, Ford, FORD, like the car.
There you go.
.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook.
Wonderful.
That's the easiest.
Yeah. So find Lois Letchford. Email her. She is full of energy, and I feel like she will respond back to the emails. I just have a sense of that.
If I receive them, yes.
It's so much fun, Lois. I love your energy.
It's infectious and wonderful.
Well, just changing the subject, when I taught Nicholas back in 95, teaching went from being this, painful experience to so exciting.
Right.
And that's what I took with me when I was in Lubbock. How can I turn my students? And it's not I'm the teacher, I know everything. It's a community of learners. How am I going to take my students? And we're walking together on this journey.
I love that. And again, I think joy, I say this a lot, you got to seek joy. And I need it for myself. I gave myself a joy check the other day of I'm taking things way too seriously and I'm not having fun. And when that's true, my darker person comes out, right? Because, my competitive energy or whatever, feeling defensive, the things that aren't me at my best come out. But when I'm lighter, those things don't even get in. They can bounce right off of me.
Somebody the other day defined for me what work-life balance is, and I'm going to work towards it, but it's when you can still find joy in both.
Right.
And that's a good thing to end on, a goal, right? To still find the joy in both.
Wonderful. I wanted to tell everyone, since we're live and this will be playing for a minute, part of what we talked about today was hearing a parent and an educator's story about what worked for them in education and what was transformative. And I happen to have gotten this little grant to be able to pay some educators to tell their story. So if you have a story that you want to tell about what's happening for you in school, and Lois, if you have colleagues or people that that want to tell a story about what's happening in school, there's a few opportunities. One, you get a scholarship to an organization called the Op-Ed Project, which helps you to write actually an op-ed, so you can actually try and possibly publish your story somewhere. So that's the scholarship. You get a couple of months of biweekly brainstorming sessions with other educators that are writing together that I will be hosting. If you're op-ed doesn't get published, I'll publish it on my website, so it will go somewhere. And Susan and I will interview you here, right, Susan? I'm kind of springing this.
Yeah, no, that's
I feel like we talked about it.
Yeah,
so
we talked about a lot. So
I just, artistic license. I just went for it. So you can also be on this show. So if you're interested in that, please go to my website, which is drmegansweet.com. That's DRMEGANSWEET.com, and go to School Stories, and there's one of the tabs there, and you can learn about that. We'd love to have your participation in that program. That's my and if you like the show, watch, Susan, I'm doing it. If you like the show, like it and tell other people about it and rate it, share it. I feel like
notification button for you.
Yeah.
I feel like everybody should know about Lois's story and just the powerful impact. She also wrote a book, which she isn't quite talking about, but she has a book that also shares this story and an approach. You want to show it, Lois? Bring it out.
Yes, that's my book, Reverse to Memoir. And you can see there's a map there, isn't there?
Oh,
there is a map there.
That's the Ptolemy map that turned Nicholas's life upside down for the better.
That's so beautiful. Lois, you're a rock star and a great mom. And if your son doesn't take care of you in your advanced age, you let me know, and I'm going to come find him and talk to him about it. Because you have earned it.
He's phenomenal. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been just a delight.
Thank you for having me. I need an op-ed.
All right. Apply, Lois.
I will.
drmegansweet.com.
I will be applying. Not tonight.
Nope. Due September 30th. So you have 13 more days. Plenty.
Can I tell you something else before we go?
Sure.
I've had my first academic paper published.
Congratulations. That's a big deal. Those do not, for the lay people out there, it is not easy to get an academic paper published. Lots of people have opinions about what you have to say.
With Dr. Tim Rosinski. It's on pronoun resolution, and it's in the Reading Teacher. Came out in July. I don't know when it will be published in print.
Well, I'm going to share it with some folks. I know my mother-in-law, who's an English teacher, I can just tell by the title, she's going to love it. So
yeah, she will. Yeah.
I'm going to thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.